Only a couple days after Pete Carroll said that Abe Lucas was day-to-day with a knee injury, the second-year tackle is heading to injured reserve, leaving the Seahawks offensive line in a bit of a bind. We're going to be taking a look at Lucas's injury and what the Seahawks are doing to try to compensate for that injury up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, for this latest Matchup Wednesday by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening from Salem, Oregon, or across the country in Dover, Delaware. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're drawing closer to week 2. The Seahawks hoping to get on the winning side of things after a rough season opener, heading to Detroit to face a very good Lions team. We're going to be diving into all the key matchups to watch, and both teams have some offensive line questions heading into this game, creating a bit more intrigue heading into this week 2 contest at Ford Field. This episode is brought your way by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Rob, it's kind of fitting that we're talking about a medical company now going into an unfortunate injury development for the Seahawks today. And it's really bizarre how this has played out the last 3 or 4 days. After Sunday's game, Abraham Lucas, the starting right tackle, he exited early in the second half with a sore knee. Pete Carroll said that it wasn't even an injury, that it was just a flare-up, just a sore knee. And then the day after, he says, we've ran all the tests. Nothing has come back to suggest that he's going to need any work done. It's just a sore knee. And he was day-to-day. Well, today he's on injured reserve. So Abraham Lucas is going to miss at least the next 4 games. He's going to be out a minimum of 5 weeks because Seattle's bye week is in there. That's good. He's going to get an extra week to recover from whatever is going on. But from going from not having an injury and just having a sore knee to now being out for more than a month, this is certainly not a great situation for the Seattle Seahawks and their offensive line.
No, it really is not. I mean, Corbin, just yesterday, we had the panic meter. I'm happy that we had the panic meter conversation yesterday where I could say a 1 to a 2, because right now it'd be a 3 to a 4. I mean, it is a significant development here for Seattle that their star right tackle, because Abraham Lucas played very, very well as a rookie a year ago. And you and I were both anticipating development from both he and the left tackle, Charles Cross, who, oh, by the way, also is probably unlikely to play in this game against the Detroit Lions, who feature a pretty formidable pass rush. So this is significant news for the Seahawks. It's very concerning news because, as you said, with Pete Carroll articulating it the way that he did, this is not an injury. It sounded a little bit more concerning, a little bit more like this is something that has been around for a while. And of course, when you have a player as young as Abe Lucas is, as tough as he is, a 4-year starter at Washington State, that it puts all kinds of possibilities into your head. So that's really where I'm concerned. It's about the young man's health and his future moving forward. And then, of course, what's Seattle is going to be able to do in the meantime. And that's what gets interesting here, is that Seattle did sign some players. They brought back their own player in Greg Island to the practice squad. They signed Jason Peters, who's going on now 2 decades in the NFL, a 9-time Pro Bowl. That sounds great, but still, we're talking about players who are 40 years old, and you're hoping they might be able to come in and possibly contribute immediately. That's concerning. Then to a couple of other players that they signed off of practice squads, as we kind of talked about before. McClendon Curtis, and I personally think that he is at his best at the guard position, but he certainly is built more like a tackle at 6'6", 324 pounds, 35-inch arms. And then a player who is built a little bit more like a guard, but plays better at tackle. And Raekwon O'Neal, 6'4", 300-pounder, 33.5-inch arms. So to me, this is a huge development for the Seahawks. Neither of the two players that they just signed, again, McClendon Curtis and Raekwon O'Neal, do I think are going to be able to come in and contribute immediately against the Detroit Lions. So really, what this all kind of boils down to is for Sunday's matchup against the Detroit Lions, I think you're going to see an awful lot of Stone Forsythe, an awful lot of Jake Curhan, and perhaps, again, Jason Peters coming off the bench, so to speak, to be able to provide Seattle a spell if they need him to.
Reporters were talking with Jason Peters today, and one of the questions he got is why come back with how long you've been playing football? Why come back? And he said 20 sounds better than 19, and he believes that the Seahawks are a contender. So this was a great opportunity for him. And he was also asked about when he thought he could be ready. He's like, I might be ready on Sunday. Maybe it'll take a little longer. I got to get the pads back on. And again, this guy has played so much football that if he's in shape, which everything I've been told is he's in shape, they wouldn't have signed him, I don't think, otherwise. This guy just lives to play football. And so he showed up for his visit. They signed him right afterwards. So if there's a guy that can pull it off, it's 41-year-old Jason Peters. He could be out there playing at either left or right tackle. I would suspect right tackle, even though left tackle is where he's played most of his career. He played some right tackle and played fairly well for the Cowboys last year. So I would think if he's going to be able to play on Sunday, probably pushing it a little bit, but if anybody's going to be able to do it, it's him. Now, as for these two additions, those of you that listen to Locked On Seahawks regularly, again, thank you to each and every one of the 12s, 5 days a week listening to Locked On Seahawks. But if you remember the pre-draft process, McClendon Curtis was one of my gems. He was one of the players that I was extremely excited about. I had a 5th-round grade on him, and you mentioned him being better at guard than tackle. I think long-term that tackle is the better position for him, and he's athletic enough to play it. But the one big red flag I had on his pre-draft scouting is his feet sometimes betray him, particularly in pass pro. Even though he has the athleticism, I think, to be able to develop in that area, he still needs his fundamentals cleaned up. But, Rob, you look at the preseason for him with the Raiders, he was fantastic. Now, it's only 25 snaps. It's going against backups, but still, no sacks, no pressures, no QB hits allowed. He had the 7th best Pro Football Focus grade among tackles and guards with at least 20 snaps in the preseason. Again, a very small sample size, but Curtis has 35-inch arms. He had an RAS score, relative athletic score, of almost 8, which is really impressive for a man of his size. There's a lot to like about this player. And, oh, by the way, our buddy Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, it was one of the players he was most surprised did not get drafted from that Senior Bowl class, and he is very high on him. So this is a nice addition for Seattle. And when you look at Raekwon O'Neal as well, he had a fantastic preseason for the Buccaneers. He didn't give up any sacks, pressures, or QB hits. And, Rob, maybe what's working most in O'Neal's favor, he's coming from Tampa Bay where Dave Canales is the offensive coordinator. So there might be a lot of carryover with what he's going to be doing now in Seattle from what he did in Tampa. He might be having a built-in advantage where he could be ready to play quicker just because of familiarity with the former QB coach being the OC now in Tampa Bay.
I think that's an excellent point. And I think, again, here with Raekwon O'Neal, in my opinion, he's a little bit more pro-ready if you are looking for an offensive tackle. He is a guy, as I said before, I think that he's built a little bit more like a guard. 6'4", 6'3.5", 300 pounds, and he's got a lot of his weight kind of in his midsection and his lower half. And, so he doesn't really look like a tackle. I mean, a lot of Seattle tackles are 6'5", 6'6", and up, and they almost look like former tight ends, which is exactly what Jason Peters was. But with Raekwon O'Neal, he is just so light on his feet. He's balanced, he's quick, he's powerful. Frankly, if he was an inch or two taller, if he had played his entire college career at Rutgers, where he started, or at UCLA, where he finished, and played very well, 12th game starter a year ago at the left tackle position, I really think he would have been drafted. It's just the fact that he bounced around a little bit. And again, he's just an inch or so shorter than people normally want at the tackle position. That's why he wound up getting himself, undrafted. But again, I think that he is the more likely of the two players that Seattle signed that was not initially in the NFL, like in Jason Peters' case, or with the Seahawks in Greg Island's case. I think he is the more likely of the two to be able to come in and contribute immediately at tackle. And then with McClendon Curtis, as you mentioned, we were both very high on him. His initial quickness, his power, to me, reminds me a little bit of Anthony Bradford, who the Seahawks did sign in the did draft in the 4th round, and it really had some splashy moments in the preseason. I think that he's a little bit raw. I think that he is somebody that you would love the Seahawks to be able to develop. I don't even know if McClendon Curtis's signing had anything really to do with the injury issues that the Seahawks had at the offensive tackle positions. I think this is just an example of a player that they thought that there was some upside there, and they just wanted to kind of pluck from the Raiders because they saw a guy who has some real upside to him. So as I mentioned before, I like him better at guard. That's where he played a lot of the snaps with the Raiders at the right guard position. Look, I like Phil Haynes. I like Anthony Bradford. I also like McClendon Curtis and think that he could be something to develop as the Seahawks move forward.
And I think that's the key word here. If you're looking for a silver lining, the Abe Lucas news, there's no sugarcoating it. It's awful news for this offensive line, especially when you're getting ready to play a really good defensive front with Aidan Hutchinson and company in the Detroit Lions. Not having him or Cross potentially this weekend, that is a huge issue for Seattle's offensive line. But you did land 2 players that have draftable qualities, and you were able to bring them in off of practice squads from other teams, and they were able to do that off waivers with Drake Thomas and Kyu Blue Kelly as well. I mean, this has ended up being a 14, 15 player draft class when you're considering some of the guys that they are bringing in. So 2 really intriguing developmental players that they can work with. But right now, if they need a replacement, you would think Jason Peters, the 41-year-old that's played so many games, that's going to be the one the Seahawks are hoping they can get ready to go as quick as possible so that he can play while Abe Lucas is out for at least the next 4 or 5 weeks. Coming up next, it's Matchup Wednesday. We're going to look at the Seahawks on offense against the Lions on defense. Don't go away. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our partners at eBay Motors. eBay Motors has teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire every week, we're going to provide players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. With draft prep already in the books and the season underway, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. If you're looking for a sweet matchup to exploit for a big game at wide receiver in week 2, turn to the Chargers' Mike Williams. Williams was quiet and banged up in the run-heavy opener against Miami, but he draws a beautiful spot against a Titans secondary, which struggled to handle any of the Saints receivers, including Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Look for Justin Herbert to hit on at least one big scoring play to Williams. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your football championship, your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is all about finding the players being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For our everydayers, Crossover Thursday is coming back tomorrow. Matt Derry of Locked On Lions. I feel like we've been meeting with him every year, and this is going to be a really fun, in-depth crossover as we continue to dive deeper into Sunday's upcoming game between the Seahawks and the Lions. You won't want to miss it. Let's get to those sweet and spicy matchups, shall we? And this is kind of an interesting game coming up for the Seahawks and Lions because both teams, Rob, and we'll get to the other side of the equation later in the show, but both teams are dealing with injuries at tackle. As we were just discussing, Abe Lucas going to injured reserve. He's going to miss at least 4 games. Charles Cross is going to be challenged, as Pete Carroll worded it, to be able to play this weekend with a sprained toe. So Seattle's probably going to have 2 backup tackles. And when you look at Detroit's defense, their feature star talent, the rising superstar, unfortunately, is on that defensive line off the edge in Aidan Hutchinson. And that is going to create a very difficult matchup, especially for Jake Curhan on the right side, where Aidan Hutchinson tends to play most of his snaps for the Lions.
Yeah, exactly. Aidan Hutchinson sometimes will line up as a defensive end, sometimes most often as an outside linebacker, as the rush linebacker in their system. You mentioned Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl executive, and former Seahawks scout among other NFL clubs. And just like he liked McClendon Curtis, he also liked Jay Curran, and I like Jay Curran. I think he's a good, solid football player. I think the Aidan Hutchinson is an absolute superstar. He was my top-rated prospect a couple of years ago. The Jacksonville Jaguars wound up going with Trayvon Walker's #1 overall pick. The Detroit Lions took Aidan Hutchinson, the Michigan product, #2 overall. And I just ask you to look at the statistics that they both have posted since that time to see what has been the better selection. Aidan Hutchinson not only is physically gifted, he uses his hands very, very well. He's quick, he's powerful, he's also absolutely relentless. And that's one of the things I like about Jay Curran. He's going to bring that kind of blue collar workman like attitude. He is going to physically compete, but I do think that this is a significant matchup for the Seahawks. Just like we talked so much about Aaron Donald, I thought the Seahawks did a pretty nice job of slowing down Aaron Donald for at least most of the game. In the opener, Geno Smith might disagree, but I thought that for the most part, again, the Seahawks did a pretty nice job of that. With Aidan Hutchinson, however, and a pretty formidable defensive line around him, as well as the forward field crowd, I do think that this is the key matchup in a lot of ways for the Seahawks. And then again, if it comes back to Jason Pierce, this is just going to show how long I've been doing this, Corbin. I remember evaluating Jason Pierce as a tight end way back in 2004. If he winds up becoming, playing a significant amount of time here, then I do think that his size, his girth, and certainly his experience might be able to provide Seattle a little bit of help if they want to kind of mix things up a little bit alongside Jake Curran, or perhaps even Stone Forsythe, because Aidan Hutchinson, again, is one of those kind of game wreckers that you absolutely have to game plan for.
I'm extremely worried about Jake Curhan trying to block Aidan Hutchinson. And I'm with you. I like Jake Curhan. I think that his skill set, though, probably is better suited at the guard position in the NFL, because what we have seen, the 5 games he started as a rookie, in the run game, I thought he really cleaned up. And Rashad Penny loved running behind him. He was a key part of that explosion those last 6 games. The issue is that he just doesn't move well enough. His footwork is not where it needs to be. When he's dealing with somebody like Aidan Hutchinson, or in this past game going up against the rookie from Tennessee, dealing with athletic guys that are relentless off the edge, even though he brings that blue collar mentality, there does come a point where the lack of athleticism and the inability to be able to stay with those guys in his pass sets becomes an issue. And so Seattle is going to need to help him. They didn't do that much at the end of the game last week, and they paid for it. Will Dissly is going to need to be part of that equation. Noah Fant, Colby Parkinson, get those chip blocks from running backs in there. Do what you can do to help out your right tackle. Don't have him be on an island. I think if they can do that, Jay Curhan can do a good enough job there. I just don't think you can expect one-on-one blocking against Aidan Hutchinson consistently, that is going to play out well for you. I don't envision that. On the other side of the equation, I actually like this matchup for Stone Forsythe if he's going up against somebody like Charles Harris, because I think that Stone Forsythe is better equipped to handle speed rushers than he is guys that are more power-oriented. So I actually like some of the matchups that he may have on the left side. I'm just concerned with Jake Curhan against Aidan Hutchinson, though, because of the athleticism difference there. He is going to need help from Seattle's offense. As far as the next advantage matchup for the Seahawks, it's crazy because last week we thought the Seahawks had a major advantage against the Rams secondary, and early on it looked to be the case. Then in the second half, the Rams secondary shut down DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Tyler Lockett, they thought he had a concussion. Luckily he didn't. He missed a chunk of the game, really held that receiving core in check. But if you look at Detroit's defense, they've got an upgraded safety group. I love their front line. We'll get to the linebackers in a moment. But if there is a position group where I feel like Seattle's got an advantage, Rob, it has to be the receivers. Metcalf, JSN, Lockett going against Cameron Sutton, who was their big free agent addition, but he's a guy that can be beat downfield, not the most athletic outside corner. And you look at the rest of their corners on their roster, they don't really have anybody else that jumps out to you as above average in that group. This still feels like the one position where Seattle can really have an advantage on the road and get some big plays.
Yeah, if they have any kind of decent pass protection, again, I referenced the the panic meter yesterday, and that point was basically what I kind of chose was in Pete and in Gino we trust, and that's really where we have to see again if he has enough pass protection. I really think that this is a secondary that Geno Smith should be able to exploit a little bit. As you mentioned with Cam Sutton, good football player, but a guy that I think that the Seahawks should be able to kind of attack down the field a little bit. I 100% agree with you. I think that Detroit has a pretty formidable safety tandem back there, but again, the cornerback situation is a little bit more interesting. I'm Jerry Jacobs is a former undrafted free agent out of Arkansas, kind of like Jason Peters we talked about before. But he's a guy that I think that whether it be Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf on the outside, I think that they have the straight line speed that might be able to kind of get him over the top. And then the rookie Brian Branch. Now he had a splashy pick six, for the Lions a week ago against his Kansas City Chiefs, was huge in Detroit's upset of Kansas City. I still am curious to see the kind of the rookie matchup. To me, that's the one I'm the most interested in, frankly, is Jackson Smith and Jigba. I was critical of him in yesterday's show. I want to see him kind of prove me wrong. I want to see him be able to make some big plays against Brian Branch, because these are two guys that there were some questions about their athleticism, not about their instincts, not about their playmaking ability, but in terms of straight line speed. So it will be interesting to see if Seattle is able to carve out some space, be able to get their passing game going, because to me, what's really critical is they are able to get their running game going. But I think that's the matchup we're going to be talking about here next.
Yeah, that was a perfect segue. If you want to be able to throw the ball and take advantage of the corners that the Lions have, and again, I think their safeties are fantastic, so I'm not knocking this secondary completely, but I do think that the corners, there is a major advantage skill-wise for the Seattle Seahawks. But they have to be able to take advantage of that, and it isn't just having pass protection to keep Geno Smith upright. You also got to be able to run the football, because how can you slow Aidan Hutchinson down? How can you slow Charles Harris down? You get that run game going downhill. And so I'm looking at Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker III going up against the Lions linebackers. Alex Anzalone, the veteran. They've got rookie Jack Campbell, who obviously you and I were both very high on in the pre-draft process. He had a good debut for the Lions last week, playing a little bit of a limited role. They were playing him more on base packages, but they've also got Barnes, formerly from Purdue. They've got some really athletic linebackers, Rodriguez as well from Oklahoma State. They've got a number of athletic linebackers, but they're not necessarily a big group in the middle. So I'm thinking that this is still a group that you can take advantage of, getting downhill, running the football. And you can't tell me Evan Brown isn't excited about this opportunity to go against his former team and try to open up some holes for his running back. So I think if Seattle's going to win this game, they're going to have to be able to win this matchup where the running backs are getting to the second level, breaking some tackles, making the linebackers miss, get some chunk plays, and that's going to open up play action. Then you can really open things up with your passing game.
Yeah, Corbin, yesterday I thought I tried to articulate that one of the real positives I think that's being overlooked in Seattle's loss to the Rams, because it was a horrific loss, let's be real about it,
Yep.
but was the play of Ken Walker III. And I do think that as dynamic as he was against the Rams, averaging over 5 yards per carry, at the end of the day, the Seahawks did not get to that 100-yard rushing mark. And anytime that you struggle to do that, you're probably not going to win very many football games. So I'll just say it as bluntly as this: if the Seahawks don't get to 100 rushing yards, they absolutely will lose this game. And so that's the thing, is I think that you have to make that an absolute priority here. I agree with the veteran linebackers. In my opinion, Alec Anzalone is one of the more underrated linebackers in all of the NFL. Not that I think he's a superstar. I just think he's a damn solid linebacker. He's proven that over and over again, previously in New Orleans, now here in Detroit. Derek Barnes, a good solid player. Jack Campbell is a very instinctive player. Frank Rodriguez, as you mentioned before, very athletic in workouts, and is also an instinctive player, but still they lack great size. I think it's a team that you might be able to just pound the rock down their throat a little bit. And just like the LA Rams proved in Seattle, I hope that, or I think that the Seahawks might be able to do in Detroit is you can eliminate the crowd factor if you just run the ball right down a team's throat and just quiet down the crowd a little bit, because they get bored and they get disinterested when you are, kind of taking their soul away from them just by being the more physical team. Now I have my concerns about whether Seattle is going to be able to do that, but if they're going to win, that pretty much is the recipe that they're going to have to follow.
Coming up next, we're going to switch gears to the Seahawks on defense after a really disappointing first outing against the Rams. We're going to look at 3 key matchups for Seattle going against Detroit. High-powered offense, got plenty of weapons at Jared Goff's disposal. We'll get to that here in a moment on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends at Jace Medical. 2 years ago, I randomly got sick during the middle of the day on a Sunday, and I didn't want to have to rush to an urgent care to get a big medical bill. Thank goodness I had the Jace case from Jace Medical with immediate antibiotics that I could use to get myself feeling better fast without all the upfront costs associated with heading to an emergency room or urgent care. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace case. The Jace case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jace Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jace Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using the code LOCKEDON at checkout at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players' stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. This week on Prize Picks, I'm picking DK Metcalf to surpass 75 receiving yards and Derrick Henry to go above 80 rushing yards for the Titans. Prize Picks is an absolute blast each week, and it's an easy way to enjoy daily fantasy without the hassle and land some quick winnings. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You're listening to Matchup Wednesday here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to listen into tomorrow's crossover Thursday special, Locked On Seahawks, Locked On Lions, as we continue to dive deep into this really exciting upcoming matchup between the Seahawks and Lions at Ford Field. Speaking of that matchup, let's get back to the individual matchup, shall we? The Detroit Lions, they have plenty of weapons on offense, didn't light up the scoreboard in Kansas City last week. In fact, the reason they won was because of defensive points from the interception from Brian Branch. It was overall not the most efficient day offensively, but don't let that fool you. This is an offense like the Seahawks that is capable of doing a lot more damage than they did in the season opener. And Rob, when you're looking at matchups to watch here, there's a lot of elite weapons to consider on this offense, but it feels like, just like with the Seahawks on offense, that in this particular game, the offensive line is where we need to zoom in, the trenches where the Seahawks need to see if they can get better results they did against the Rams.
Well, Corbin, we've talked many times before about you being the running back aficionado that you are, that you played the position, that you coached the position, you know it very well. When I played offensive line, not at a high level, I'm certainly not trying to say that, but I played it, I coached it. I love to watch quality play. And, the Detroit Lions, I think, have one of the better offensive lines in all of the NFL. As I talked about before, I think that the Seahawks have some talent on the defensive line. One of my absolute favorite defensive linemen in all the NFL is Jarran Reed. I think that you can kind of just argue that that front against Seattle's is going to be just kind of worth its own matchup. It's basically like a WWE or whatever you want to call it, kind of, get your popcorn ready and just watch the big men battle. But if you want to talk about from a Seahawks perspective, what actually could result in a win, you said it before. The way that the Detroit Lions were able to beat the Kansas City Chiefs is they got a defensive score. Taylor was so damn close to getting a sack or two against the LA Rams that I thought they could have absolutely changed that game. The Detroit Lions have one of the best right tackles in all of the NFL, and Penei Sewell. I had the opportunity to watch him so many years there at Oregon, where he was a Morris Trophy winner. And the one thing that, he is a phenomenal athlete, but one of the things that he can be a little bit vulnerable is to pure speed off the edge. So while I want to watch the guys like Jaron Reed and the Lions center Frank Ragnow just absolutely hit heads like two bighorn sheep up on a mountainside, if the Seahawks are trying to win this football game, then they've got to be better in terms of their pass rush. I think that there's actually a really intriguing matchup on the other side because the Rams have their left tackle Taylor Decker is going to be out in this game or possibly out in this game, and that creates all kinds of matchups. There's no question about it. Uchenna Nwosu has been Seattle's best edge rusher so far, but I think that there is a possibility that this is the game on that turf and against a guy like Penei Sewell, who's more about run blocking than he is about pass protection. I do think that Darrell Taylor could have the splashy performance, and that is, the recipe I think that the Seahawks need to follow if they're going to be able to kind of go into the Ford Field and be able to steal out a win again this year after doing basically the same thing a year ago.
There's a lot to unpack in this matchup with injuries, not just the fact that Taylor Decker is dealing with an ankle injury and did not practice today for the Lions. There's a chance he's not available in this game, and Matt Nelson's the backup. That is a big drop-off. That would be an ideal matchup for both Uchenna Nwosu and Derek Hall coming in, quite frankly, as a reserve to be able to get after it. And Sewell going up against either Darrell Taylor, Boye Mafe. Mafe did not practice today. I've been told they're hoping he's back on the field tomorrow. So probably just trying to make sure that he's good to go. He got banged up in that opener. But either way, this does feel like a matchup Seattle can take advantage of. But there's the Mafe injury and you've got the Taylor Decker injury that are both kind of hovering over this. And whoever ends up playing in this game and who backs up if they aren't in, those are things that really can be X factors when you're talking about games like this. Now, Devin Witherspoon, we've been waiting to see him out in a game uniform. He didn't play at all in the preseason. He was a full participant today. Pete Carroll made it sound like before practice, like he's ready to go. He is going to be out there on the field. Now, the question is going to be, where do you start him at? And I think he's eventually going to be your other boundary corner across from Reek Woolen, maybe as early as a couple weeks from now. But in his first game action, Rob, when you consider who's on the other side, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of the rising superstar receivers in the NFL right now. And he does so much of his damage from the slot. An outstanding route runner, really quick, knows how to read defenses. I just feel like Seattle has to put Devin Witherspoon on him in this game because Witherspoon has the quickness, the change of direction skills, and the physicality. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a physical player. You might remember the first time the Seahawks had to play him 2 years ago. He did not play in that game last year when the Lions still put up 40-plus points. If they have him in that game, I think they win that football game. But he lit the Seahawks up in December a couple years ago in that game at Lumen Field at the end of the season. He is such a physical route running specimen, and he's just crafty on top of it. Devin Witherspoon's physicality and his instincts, his change of direction, that might be the most exciting get your popcorn ready matchup in this game that really could dictate whether the Lions or the Seahawks win it. No pressure, Devin Witherspoon, but I think that is certainly a matchup to watch closely, and that's where I'm predicting he's going to be playing in his first game for the Seahawks.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, again, I get all excited about the offensive and defensive line. That to me is where football still is won or lost. But if you're looking at this from a fantasy perspective, unless you're going to be willing to take your eyes off the football and really watch the line of scrimmage, I mean, it doesn't get much better than Amon-Ra St. Brown and then possibly Devin Witherspoon, possibly Kobe Bryant. It remains to be seen who is going to be Seattle's starter at the nickel back position. but I promise you that Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to absolutely be a huge factor in this football game. We just saw Puka Nacua absolutely terrify the Seahawks and essentially win that game. He and Matthew Stafford won that game for the Rams. And I think that Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown are even better. And so unless Seattle's nickel play is significantly better, then you are going to hear the name Amon-Ra St. Brown way too often from a Seahawk perspective. That really could be the matchup that really dictates who wins or loses this football game.
And I think the underlying matchup, and it's only fitting, Mr. Running Back has to bring the running backs in the equation here, but it isn't just because of running the football that I'm going to be mentioning this. We talked about this a little bit yesterday on the show. We were taking a first look at the Lions, that they didn't just draft a running back in the first round. Obviously, they spent a very early pick on Jahmyr Gibbs, who's a fantastic talent. He can break tackles between the tackles. He's a hard-nosed runner. He's got the ability to run outside, a very smooth pass catcher as well. But they also brought in David Montgomery, who is kind of that battering ram between the tackles, but he also can catch the football. Both these guys have the ability to do damage in the passing game, which is why I'm highlighting this matchup. Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, Devin Bush, I'm expecting still going to get some snaps as well. But those three off-ball linebackers, they are going to be tasked with trying to deal with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. And I'd say Gibbs is the more dangerous of the two, but Montgomery has done plenty of damage in the past as a receiver. But Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy that has receiver qualities out of the backfield that can do a lot of damage after the catch. And that is going to put a lot of strain on an aging Bobby Wagner. Jordan Brooks looked really good last week, but he's still just coming back from that torn ACL. This is going to be one of those matchups that I expect that we're going to see the Lions try to attack and get those running backs involved in the passing game. The onus is going to fall on these linebackers to step up to the challenge after having, I thought it was an okay game in coverage last week, but they're going to be tasked for a different reason in this one. And I expect there's going to be plenty of those intermediate crosses they're going to have to deal with, because this is a similar style offense to the Rams in a lot of different ways. But that running back spot, not just stopping them in the run game, but also being able to cover them man to man, that is going to be a significant matchup for the Seahawks on Sunday.
It's a very concerning one. Frankly, I mean, we've listed three good matchups here, and I think you can make an argument this should be the number one matchup. And just because out of respect to Ford Field, I'll just use this analogy. I mean, David Montgomery is the F-150 of the bunch. He's going to be the one who is powering through, and then there is no question about Jahmyr Gibbs is the Mustang. I mean, he has electric speed. And so, yes, I think that you are absolutely right to be listing there Jahmyr Gibbs and Bobby Wagner in particular. If the Seahawks ask Bobby Wagner to try to run with Jahmyr Gibbs at this point in his career, Jahmyr Gibbs is just an electric athlete. He is going to show off, that burst and that acceleration and those terrific hands out of the backfield. It's kind of like I mentioned before about Darrell Taylor and Penei Sewell. I can imagine a scenario in which the Seahawks are able to win this game. I also can imagine a scenario if the Lions get ahead, then we've seen Darrell Taylor struggle in run defense, and Penei Sewell will punish you in that way. And again, as excited as I am about Bobby Wagner's return to the Seahawks with dynamic running backs like Jahmyr Gibbs, and again, the physicality that David Montgomery has as well, I could absolutely see the Detroit Lions two-headed monster at running back position really forcing Seattle's linebackers to look a little bit silly at times in Sunday's matchup.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be teaming up with my friend Matt Derry from Locked On Lions in our latest Crossover Thursday installment, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into everything to be looking out for when the Seahawks battle the Lions at Ford Field. It's going to be a really fun episode. Make sure you're listening in. Thanks for tuning into this show and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.